Hello. Today we have a mini guide on the SPECTRE-based Pathfinder, which can handle all of the endgame for a lot of money, and for less money, it can take on pinnacle bosses and mid-game content. And you know, I have mixed feelings about this build. I could start shouting and convincing you that this is the best build in the universe if I made a video after playing it for 1 to 2 days. But I've been actively playing on this lover of non-alcoholic flaming drinks for 2 weeks, and my first impression was like with a girl. You think you're a perfect match and that she has no flaws, and the fact that she's a drunk, well, that's even a plus. But after a week, you start noticing some oddities, like she can't get it up or she's collecting random rubber Spider-Man slippers. And I noticed these quirks in my Pathfinder too. And her flaws are so annoying that playing this build becomes less and less enjoyable each day. And I find myself wanting to go outside more than run maps, which is unacceptable for me. Let's quickly go over the build. It's a Doriani's Spectre-based Pathfinder using Retro Defilers. These Spectres are only found on T17 maps, and with this build I've cleared everything, and quite easily. The only problematic content for this sweet treat is juiced up T17 maps, but more on that later. The build relies on a balance of, wow, what damage, and wow, I tanked that. And idiot Spectres, what are you even doing? For example, it has serious defenses like Lucky Blocks, 90% fire and cold resistances, and complete conversion of all lightning damage from hits into cold. The build also has the required 3 red orbs from the tree, more than 3k life regen under a flask, and petrified blood, which makes the incoming damage delayed, allowing us to regen it with a flask. And importantly, this is a minion-based gameplay style where first the minions suffer, then your computer suffers, and finally, you suffer. And you know, I didn't just mention the computer randomly because among my YouTube subscribers I'm giving away a powerful gaming... Just kidding. I'm not giving anything away, but you can subscribe. But I did mention the computer for a reason. So let's get straight to the biggest problem of the build. After playing on it, my PC refuses to talk to me. Although, to be fair, it only talked to me once after those mushrooms, but now it's completely silent. These Spectres are a lag machine with 1,000 pistons in PoE. It's not just that they generate 100 plus projectiles per second on the screen. That's a problem, sure, but not the biggest one. The real issue is that they spawn skeletal bugs with 3.5 HP. Then these bugs die, leaving their remains behind, and they get spawned again. This cycle continues until there isn't even 2 centimeters of space on your arena without skeletons. Eventually, the skeletons start dying on top of each other, and your FPS ends up among the dead bodies. The next problem with this build isn't just minor. It's a major one. The Spectres are dumb. Sometimes they stop attacking and start munching on chips, or they straight up ignore a 200-ton Uber boss that's about to ride you like a horse, even though it's right in front of them. Sometimes they prioritize weird targets, like the totems on the Abomination map. Yep, they won't touch the boss until they destroy all 3 totems first. That's just how stubborn they are. And the final problem is that on juiced-up, delirium-orbed T17 maps, your Spectres probably won't even reach the boss with their full numbers. You'll end up with a few wheelchair-bound invalids, and those that survive won't make it through the entire fight. But in defense of these guys, I'll say that they don't die at all on Ubers, not under the Uber Shaper's beam, nor from the Uber Exarch's balls. They just don't die on Ubers. Somehow, juiced-up T17 maps are kryptonite for them, though, even though by GGG's logic, T17 is weaker than the Ubers. Well, it happens. So those are the downsides of the build. If you don't plan on farming juiced-up T17 maps, since the build handles regular boss rushes perfectly, 10 out of 10, if your computer is a space station, and you're ready to deal with brain-damaged Spectres that occasionally gain consciousness and live their own lives, then this build will bring you wonderful emotions. The clearing speed feels like you've got 8 little lightning arrow sweethearts running around, and the absurd defense, which in POB shows nearly 1 million effective HP, is validated by the fact that I AFK through all simulacrum waves, face tank all Uber bosses, juiced T16s, and so on. Plus, the build isn't even that expensive. About 150 divines are enough for a good version. There's a lot of damage here. How much? Well, PoB doesn't know about the existence of such Spectres, so I don't know. From the feel of it, at least 30 million, but feeling is a questionable mathematical unit of measurement, so I'll just say there's a lot of it. For example, Phoenix under Maven dies at about this speed. Earlier, I mentioned that the build is pretty tanky and could survive even on the surface of Jupiter, but what about the damage? How and with what does the build deal it? The core is the Wretched Defiler Spectres, of which there are 8. I'll explain how to get them later. The Spectre's ranged attack consists of 9 projectiles that fly in a slight spiral, and with Spell Echo, that's 18 projectiles per attack. Since we have 8 such turrets, we're getting something like 144 projectiles per attack. Not bad, considering the base damage of the Spectres is 2,600 to 6,000. For comparison, similar Spectres in style, but currently dead ones like Slave Drivers, deal almost half that damage. But there's a reason I mentioned that this is a ranged attack. These half-invalids also have a melee attack. And not only does it deal very little damage, but it also isn't lightning damage. It's trash damage. And it's important for us that all outgoing damage is lightning damage because the build uses Doriani's prototype, which makes enemy lightning resistances equal to ours. With the help of several Storm's Gifts and some other items, we reduce their lightning resistance to -200%. There's no point in going lower than -200% because the game has a cap, and in general, resistances are reduced as much as possible. Before many of you close this video, having a flashback to when you died to blue pizza in the time it takes to finish a quickie, that is, in half a second, in this build, there are no problems with pizza because there's wild regen from a flask, which allows you to escape from the disc. Sure, you can't live inside it, just like with the Shaper's Beam, but it's not an insta one-shot either. There's time to react. Yes, you have to manually press the flask constantly or use GGG's banned programs like Skype, but it's not as annoying as with tinctures. As for hits from lightning, there are no issues or funny moments since there's this wonderful amulet that converts all lightning damage into cold or fire. Doesn't matter which. Returning to the Spectres, our ants can create skeletal bugs or whatever those things are. On maps and bosses, they act like additional meat shields, but there are many of them. Too many. And often what's underfoot is invisible to our eyes, and if it's an attack that's supposed to one-shot us, it probably won't, since this build is hard to one-shot, but it can give you a scare. The worst part, though, is that every corpse reduces your FPS. Now let's move on to the gear, where I'll go into a bit more detail about various items associated with the build. This build relies heavily on uniques, and without them, it simply doesn't work. Except maybe for the shield, which is replaceable, but the shield is the strongest slot in the game, so you shouldn't replace it. But let's not start with that. Let's start with the helmet. This is the Wraith Lord, which grants +2 levels to all minions, but prohibits the use of any minions other than Spectres, so no animatron, no zombies, etc. In return, it gives you 1 additional Spectre for each Abyssal Minion Jewel, and there can be 4 of them. Minion jewels are those brown ones, and they're called Ghastly Eye Jewels. The best modifiers to get on these jewels are HP, missing resistances to cold and fire, since you may be lacking them due to Doriani's, and things like cast speed or increased minion damage if you recently used a minion skill. Convocation counts as 1. This helmet is build-defining. Without it, the build doesn't work. Doriani's prototype in this build provides roughly 100 billion% more damage, by making enemy lightning resistance equal to yours, and mine is knighted 200%. We reduce the enemy's resistances with jewels and a ring, but more on that later. In exchange for the penalty of reduced resistances, the armor begins to protect you from lightning. But you can't stack a ton of armor because it's expensive and there's no way to do it. So we'll just convert incoming lightning damage into another element using memes. I went with cold because it was cheaper. You can also get +2 to minion gem levels on the armor, which is crazy expensive. At the time of writing, it costs over 40 divines, but you can buy it cheaper if it's unlinked and use the crafting bench and tainted currency to make it a 6-link. In the bench, make 4 sockets, then use a tainted jewel to make 5, and then 6. If it goes back to 3, just repeat the process. Make 4 sockets again in the bench, and repeat. The same goes for linking. 4 link in the bench, then the 5th link through currency, and if it goes back to 3, repeat until it's 6-linked. As for the gems, You'll want to get Awakened Minion Damage level 5 as early as possible because it gives +1 to Spectre gem levels, and each level massively increases their damage and survivability. They already have brain problems, but at least this way they'll live a bit longer. The shield is Surrender. Yeah, there's nothing better in the game than this. It provides a huge amount of survivability through Lucky Block, which essentially doubles your block chance. Even if it's 65% block, well, not exactly doubles it, but if you fail to block an attack, the game lets you try again. On this shield, you'll want to run Enlighten, Determination, and Purity of Fire auras. Determination gives armor. Wow, cool. But the second aura has a little trick. It increases your maximum fire resistance based on its level, and you need it to be at least level 23, so that it gives +5% max fire resistance. There are several ways to achieve this. You can have a level 21 aura and add +2 levels to aura gems in the shield, or you can get +1 level to socketed gems on a weapon and +1 in the shield. Alternatively, you could use a unique weapon that grants +2 levels and a level 21 gem. This last option is for those who see divines only in their dreams, but unfortunately it takes away the trigger, which is sad. And the weapons. Ideally, you'd want something like this. But let's be realistic, it's expensive. Personally, I haven't tried it, but I've heard that minion aggression when works like a psychiatrist for specters and fixes their heads. However, there are only 3 ways to get it in the game. Crafting on a weapon, a unique helmet, and the Feeding Frenzy support gem. None of these options work for me, so I just trust people on the internet, because no one ever lies on the internet. Anyway, let's get back to our weapon. A staff with +2 levels and a trigger. Ideally, it also has increased minion damage and cast speed for them, which would be great. There's also a cheaper option, the Darkseer, which gives +2 to gem levels, which is really cool and generally solves problems with aura gem levels. But it's important to pay attention to the rolls and get one with +2 to HP per level, because there's also mana and energy shield, but we're interested in HP. Its main downside is that it doesn't provide a trigger, and we need Sniper's Mark and Offering. You can choose between 2 offerings. One gives block to our beloved, though half-witted specters, and the other gives them cast speed. I ran with the block option to make them die less often. In general, you can manually cast these skills and use a unique staff, but I even use a flask through Skype, so don't expect me to push buttons. Now, let's move on to another build-defining unique item, the Tides of Time belt with specific nodes. The first priority is the 3 charges for utility flasks. You need at least 3 to sustain flasks properly because the entire survivability of the build depends on them. The second most important node is 3 charges for life flasks. You can save some currency and take 2 charges, but the more, the better. Don't bother looking at mana flask rolls. The next important unique is Eyes of the Great Wolf. It has a lot of different mods, but what we are interested in is 100% of lightning damage from hits converted to another element. I've said many times that it doesn't matter which element, as we have 90% resistances to both. The second mod can be anything, but if you have a sextillion divines, you can go for maximum life. The enchantment here should be for an additional spectre, to save even more currency. Just buy one with the enchantment from trade. Boots with +3 to maximum fire resist and +2 to the level of all specters cost 2 bitcoins on trade, but you can craft them for half the price. Let's do a quick guide on crafting the boots. Right after the gems, there's the mana reservation that provides defense, shield charge for movement, and convocation, which reduces the disability level of our specters, allowing us to control them so they attack from a distance. Now the crafting of the boots, which I will sell for 40 divines. I crafted them purely for the video. Buy boots with an 86 item level on a warding base and apply a Crusader Exalted Orb to them. Then, in the crafting machine or with fossils for fire, roll until you hit +2 to maximum fire resist and some T1 Crusader node. I spent liquids worth 3 divines on this. Fossils are cheaper, but take longer. Once you have 2 nodes, one of them being maximum fire resist and the other doesn't matter, use an Orb of Dominance and pray that it upgrades to maximum fire resist on the first try. I got lucky on the first attempt. If you're unlucky, start rolling the same boots again. Let's assume you're lucky and now have boots with +3 to maximum fire resist. Next, go to trade and buy boots with +1 to all spectre gems and some other node, but make sure it's T1. These cost 1 divine on trade. This is not as profitable as crafting with fossils for minions, but it's not as tedious. 1 divine is a fair price to avoid the hassle. Then, repeat the same process. Use the Orb of Dominance. I got lucky and hit the node I needed on the first try. Don't mind these 2 other pairs of boots, they're just there. I definitely got it on the first try. Then, simply take the Awakened Orb, take the boots with +2 to Spectres, and transfer this node onto the boots with +3 to maximum fire resist. Voila! You've got a complete piece of garbage into which I slammed an Exalted Orb for T1 movement speed and crafted life from the bench. In this form, they are worth 40 divines, and the crafting costs amounted to 21 divines, even considering that I hit the Spectre node on the 3rd attempt. The cheapest and crappiest option on trade was 30 divines, so it's better to craft. Gloves are much simpler. Here, you just need resistances and life, with an empty prefix to craft minion damage from the bench. Ader and Exarch crafts should aim for suppress and minion damage or minion damage near unique enemies, depending on which one you hit faster. In the gems, it's just Molten Shell through automation and dash. Don't level dash above level 5, because it will start requiring too much mana, and be careful not to link it with automation. Lastly, we have rings. The first one is simple, with a bunch of damage, life, and minion resistances. And yes, don't ignore resistances and life for minions, because, as I've mentioned before, they have a desire to remain on the map as fertilizer, so this is useful. The second ring is more complex. It should have life, some resistance, and reduced lightning resistance. You need at least 90 lightning resistance. It's important that it doesn't have any mods that would ruin the build, like those that take life on kill, or give degeneration instead of life regeneration. We don't care about stats. You can disregard them. If you lose 70 strength or intelligence, it doesn't matter. We will fix it with a jewel. Jewels and the skill tree. This build is a whole mess of jewels, so we'll be untangling it with chopsticks. Let's start with the ones that reduce our resistances for Doriani. The first is Thread of Hope, with a massive radius. You only pick up a few points with it, but it's mostly needed for the resistance reduction. The second one is Melding of the Flesh, which can lower your resistances by up to 90-80 and reduce your maximum resistances by 4. But since we stack so much maximum resistance, we still manage to reach 90% fire resistance. Cluster jewels are focused on minion damage with nodes that enhance effects, preferably 35%. If you get 25%, that's okay too. After that, look for life, minion cast speed, and if you feel like spending the budget of a small African country, chaos resistance. To save a bit, you can take an 11-point cluster instead of a 12-point one, but, well. Next, we have 2 medium clusters for, can I say this word on YouTube? And Renewal. These points provide a lot of survivability for our Spectres as well as double damage. For Fortress Covenant, prioritize the best minion block rolls first, then look at minion damage depending on your budget. This jewel should only be placed in a cluster because it ruins the points around it. Watcher's Eye should focus on 8% block chance while under determination. If you can also get a secondary mod that converts lightning and cold damage to fire for cheap, pick it up for 2 nodes. The cool thing about this secondary mod is that it works not only for hits, but also for dot damage. Lightning dot is the only, albeit small, problem for survivability, and this reduces it by 20%. But if you have to choose between these points, block chance is much more of a priority. Next, Elegant Hubris for Caspiro. The best place to search for it is on a special site, which I'll link in the description. You select the desired socket, disable the unnecessary points I've listed, choose life and minion damage, and start looking for suitable spots. Which spots depend on impossible escape. There are 2 options, Magbane and Solipsism. This jewel allows you to pick all the nodes around the keystone without actually pathing to it. Ideally, you want to search for Magbane, as it lets you grab the Flask branch, but there's a chance that these timeless jewels won't be available on trade, so you might have to reduce the number of minion damage points to 1. This is also a timeless jewel, and with its Supreme node, it lets you completely ignore attribute requirements, so you don't even need to think about strength, dexterity, or especially intelligence while leveling. It also lets you get fully tattooed like a convict, but we'll talk about those later. The Light of Meaning in this slot gives you 50 chaos resistance. I think it's obvious why this is needed, but be aware that there are various nodes. We're only interested in the chaos resistance. Finally, we have Unending Hunger, which gives minions Soul Eater with a 50% chance. And yes, Soul Eater is that same mod from Headhunter that you want to get. This jewel needs to be placed only in this specific slot because it has an intelligence requirement. And that's all the jewels. Not only does this build love jewels, but it's also a fan of tattoo parlors because all, or almost all, attribute points are filled in. Points for strength, 1 tattoo for block chance on attacks. Just 1 such tattoo is enough to hit the block cap, which is 88%. The rest of the strength points should be used for increased life recovery from flasks. For dexterity, just slap on some cold resistance. You can also throw in a couple for spell suppression, but tattoos for suppression are very expensive, so I just for lucky suppression instead of maxing out to 100% pure suppression. Points for intelligence should be used for increased minion life, but within the radius of this jewel, you need to leave at least 2 unmodified intelligence points. Phew! This is probably the longest section on the skill tree I've ever done. And I haven't even mentioned that Lethe Shade reduces incoming damage over time, which is crucial for Doriani builds, and Iron Reflexes, which converts evasion into armor. Oh wait, I guess I did mention it after all. Flasks. In this alcohol-fueled build, flasks are as crucial as whether you'll be able to get a dog, a woman, or at least keep this build alive. The first flask is for life regeneration. It's extremely important. You need nodes that increase life recovery by up to 70% and ensure that some of the regen is transferred to minions. This allows them to survive much better. You'll need to manually use this flask every 5 seconds, but hey, with a minion playstyle, what else are you doing other than pressing flasks? Well, you could always set up some macros. If you have a good setup for this, drop it in the comments. Next up is Rumi's Concoction with top rolls. Yes, it's expensive, but every % of block chance matters. Only with top rolls can you reach the cap for lucky block. Be careful not to buy a corrupted one because there are tons of them on the trade market. But this is the trick of a skilled player because the flask needs to be tempered. Now, for the other 3 flasks, 1 for fire resistance, 1 for movement speed, and 1 for evasion. Each should have increased effect as a prefix, but with top rolls so that the duration isn't significantly reduced. The suffixes are a bit more complex. On the fire resistance flask, you want either increased armor or evasion. For the other flasks, you'll be picking up either evasion or armor, depending on what the fire resistance flask had, along with immunity to bleeding. If you're planning to run tier 17, bleeding gets applied on cooldown there. Bandits and Pantheon, I constantly switch up the Pantheon, but I mainly run it like this. As for the bandits, it's a bit of a mixed situation. On one hand, I'm with Alira because this build picks up a lot of negative resistances, and there are certain puzzles to cap fire and cold resistances. But on the other hand, Alira also provides lightning resistance, which means you need to stack more negative resistance on your ring, but in the end, it only works up to 200, so you could just go for the extra point. Spectres and where to find them. The Retcher Defiler currently resides on tier 17 maps, and there are 2 ways to obtain them. The first, simply go to a tier 17 map, start spamming Desecrate like crazy, and hope to find them. Or just head over to Global 820 and write WTB Retcher Defiler 20C, and someone will definitely respond. You can then grab the Spectre in their hideout, and it will start appearing in your Desecrate pool. As for leveling, I can't give any specific tips, but I can probably recommend Flasks again, and then spexing into Spectres. In PoE, Flasks are everything, you know? Although I was a bit harsh on the build at the start, I can't deny that I got immense enjoyment out of it. After all, the Spectre playstyle is something that suits many players and is simply fun to play. I was closing simulacrums while watching Lost, and I had a great time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and make sure to check out Twitch. Thanks for watching, wishing you luck, and peace in your city.